Start sharing.
Okay. While Akash is doing that, hello and thank you very much to all of you for coming, and thank you for the organizers for inviting Akash and I. I'll introduce myself, and then Akash will introduce himself, and then we'll carry on. So I'm Natasha Rickards. I'm a registered nurse, and I am a transfusion medicine nurse specialist with Canadian Blood Service, and I'm the nursing lead for the HLA HPA selected platelet program. I'm happy to be here with you guys today.
Thanks, and my name's Akash. I'm one of the transfusion medicine docs with CBS. I am the medical director for the Platelet Immunology Reference Lab in Brampton, and the medical lead for the HLA HPA selected platelet program. And I also wear a hospital transfusion hat where I oversee or I'm part of the transfusion medicine group at Sunnybrook in Toronto. So we were asked to come out just to talk a little bit about the program here with your group. And so we do have some slides, but we're also open to any questions. We can keep it pretty informal, which is why it would be nice if people could unmute to ask, but please feel free to use the chat. There's two of us, so one of us will try to monitor um, in case there's any questions, and we're happy to stop and talk about things or go a little bit more into detail. Okay, so I see it's 3:04. I think we've got 25 attendees, so we'll get started. And as mentioned, I think this is being recorded, so people can always listen back to it later. So at CBS, we have a team that helps with the HLA HPA platelet program. So there's a couple of other medical officers in addition to myself, including Matt Seftel and Johnny Mack. And then there's Natasha, who is the lead with me here today, and Francine Flair is the other nurse specialist. And then we've got a couple of members as part of our hub staff team, including Pat, Connie, Wendy, Parvin, Leanne, and Roya. There's an email here, hlahpa@blood.ca, which is open for anybody to email with any questions or queries. If you have urgent requests, then please don't go through that email, but contact your local CBS distribution because this is not monitored 24/7. So just general inquiries can go through there, but anything urgent, then please go through distribution as you normally would. Our goals for this talk are to hopefully by the end,
Akash,
yeah.
sorry to interrupt, but I can only see the first slide.
Oh, it's not, okay, let me try again. Okay, how's that? Thank you. Do you see the
Correct.
objectives?
You're on objectives. Yes.
Okay, and if I go back, can you see the slide with the
Yes.
team?
It
Okay,
it is
thank you.
working.
Okay,
We're
we don't
rocking it.
use
All right.
WebEx.
Carry on. Sorry. Yeah, we're not familiar with WebEx, you guys.
Okay, so thanks, Natasha. So our objectives are, yeah, by the end of this session, hopefully we'll go over some of the common causes of platelet refractoriness, talk about what clinical conditions might lead to you considering the use of HLA or HPA selected platelets for your patient, and then understand what we do as part of the program at Canadian Blood Services and what services we can offer you. So we're going to kind of talk a little bit with a case example. So this is an 83-year-old female with MDS MPD overlap syndrome who has chronic thrombocytopenia, and her platelet count usually hovers between 10 and 20. She gets transfused every so often, and generally followed as an outpatient. She unfortunately has a new diagnosis of breast cancer and so requires a lumpectomy. And when reviewed by the surgeon, he requests that her platelet count be up to 50 prior to the procedure. So that's when someone starts really paying attention to her platelet counts, and they noted that giving her a ABO match random pooled platelet didn't give much of an increment. She went from 10 to 11. And this is just sort of when they looked back then a little bit more, these yellow diamonds represent the transfusions that she got and the increments that they sort of noted. So she never really had much of a change with random platelets. And so, what is platelet transfusion refractoriness? And really, it's the a lack of platelet increment post-transfusion. And so ideally, we want the platelet count, if you measure it 10 to 60 minutes post-transfusion, you should get an increment of about 20 to 60 points, depending on the size of your patient, the number of platelets in the bag, and what's going on with your patient. So if they're stable, you'd expect a better increment. If they're sick and consuming, then maybe not as good. The definition of refractoriness depends on what type of calculation you use. In the literature, a lot of manuscripts and papers or studies will use the CCI, the correct count increment, because it takes into account the platelets in the bag, the body surface of the patient, so some of the factors. Other people will just use an absolute increment of 10 to help delineate whether they are suspecting that this is a poor increment or not. And when we talk about refractoriness, you can have non-immune factors that contribute to refractoriness, and platelets are quite sensitive, so a lot of things fall into this bucket, including things like infection, fever, bleeding, thrombosis, splenomegaly, hepatomegaly, all can consume platelets and all can lead to a decreased platelet increment. The majority of refractoriness that is reported is due to, or at least has a component of non-immune factors. And then there's the immune factors, which is due to your body forming antibodies against something in those transfused platelets. And these, the majority, are generally reported as antibodies against HLA class 1 antigens, which are expressed on platelets. But patients can also form antibodies against HPA antigens. Some patients have antibodies against both. And then sometimes high isohemagglutinin titers can also affect your platelet count increment if you're giving ABO mismatched platelets. So from our perspective as a blood supplier, we can provide products to try to work around the immune factors because that's how we can modify our platelets that we give you. All of the non-immune factors, unfortunately, they have to be dealt with at the bedside and managing the patient. And usually there's a combination of the two. And so I'll usually teach the residents that, you should monitor their response based on their baseline illness or these non-immune factors. And if they're not worsening or they're stable and the platelet count now starts to get poorer increments, you should consider the development of immune factors on top of what might be existing for the non-immune. A little bit more on HLA antigens because they're the biggest player in immune-mediated platelet refractoriness. So platelets express class 1 HLA antigens. Class 1 consists of HLA A, B, and C, with C not being very well expressed on platelets. So we really focus on HLA A and HLA B on our platelets when we think about matching or selecting platelets. And just like red cell antibodies, you form these antibodies by exposure to foreign antigens. The biggest contributors are pregnancies, transfusions, and transplants. And it has been shown that the use of the implementation of universal leukoreductions has led to a reduction in HLA alloimmunization, with transfused white cells being a potent sensitizer is the theory, and those majority being removed means there's less sensitization, but it's not down to zero. And we also know that HLA antibodies do change over time. So somebody might have many antibodies now, but after treatment or time, those antibodies may change and decrease. The CBS National Platelet Immunology Reference Lab is now located in Brampton in Ontario. Our team does testing for a variety of different things, including the platelet alloimmunization workups and help with the donor selection for patients who require these special products. We also do FNAIT, fetal neonatal alloimmune thrombocytopenia workups. We do investigations for post-transfusion purpura, and we do some of the trolley workup too for donors and patients suspected in trolley reactions. So just a very quick overview of how the antibody investigations look like. The testing is done by testing your patient's serum against beads, which are pre-coated with antigens. And if there's binding, that gets detected through a flow cytometer, which detects it as, or is reported as a mean fluorescence intensity, and it comes up in a histogram as such. And so this is a negative result where each of these sort of red markings represents one of the beads with HLA antigens that are on them in the kind of the rows below. And here you can see the MFI of the strongest one is just 150. And generally we use, above 1,000 as considered positive. So here none of the beads react. This is a negative result. By contrast, this would be a positive result where some of these beads reacting stronger, and then several of them not reacting, and so no reactivity or no antibodies against those antigens. So interpreting this, you'd say a patient's got antibodies against A23, B57, A24, and so on and so forth, up until wherever you draw your cutoff for negative. The patient in the case that I described before, this is what her antibody panel look like. So she's got strong antibodies against just about everything. A couple of things here on the right to which she has not formed antibodies, which includes her own HLA typing. So when we get these results, how do we interpret them or how do we communicate them? And that's generally done through the calculated PRA, which is basically a calculation based on the antibodies that she has formed and a prediction of, if you took a random unit, what is the chance that it would be incompatible? And so generally we get the calculated PRA through the Canadian CPRA calculator, which you can, the link is if you Google it or you use this QR code, you can get to that website. And if you put in, you check off the antigens to which the patient has antibodies, it'll tell you what is the chance that you could find something just by random. And so for her, she had antibodies against just about everything. So her PRA came up as 99%, meaning 1 in 100 randoms might actually match her and might match her typing or avoid the antibodies that she has developed. Just for interest, we pulled all the requests that came from the province of Saskatchewan. I think a lot of the testing is done locally, but we had 18 cases come for investigation. And you can see, so these are all sent for investigation of query platelet refractoriness. So there was obviously a clinical suspicion of refractoriness. And this is something that we've actually seen across the provinces, with the testing that we get is there's often a dichotomy of patients. So there's a cohort of patients here that have a higher PRA, and then there's a cohort of patients that are either negative or have low PRAs, generally due to 1 or 2 moderate or weak antibodies. And so it really seems like patients are either antibody formers or non-formers, despite being mostly exposed to products. And so I think it's important to test, but it's also kind of reassuring, like these patients who have a CPRA of 0, if they've gotten 20, 30 platelet products and they haven't formed antibodies, they're probably not going to form antibodies. And you can be pretty confident that if you're suspecting refractoriness, it's probably non-immune, or at least not HLA related. Whereas the ones that are starting to come up in CPRA, these ones who are in the 70s or 80s, probably with continued exposure will go closer to 100% as they're exposed to more antigens. The second part of our invest that we do for all of these patients is we look for HPA antibodies because we know they can also contribute to the development of refractoriness and also possibly to PTP, which in this setting can sometimes be hard to distinguish. The methodology of this assay is very similar. There are beads that are coated with specific platelet glycoproteins and their associated HPA antigens. So HPA antigens on platelets are linked to glycoproteins in groups. So glycoprotein 2b3a houses HPA 1, 3, and 4. Glycoprotein 1b9 houses HPA2, and glycoprotein 1a, 2a has HPA5. And so the beads are designed as such that there is a homozygous antigen of each type with a mixture across the beads to help you differentiate the beads that are reactive, what might be the positive antigen that is causing that reaction. And HPA antigens are pretty straightforward, and there's an A or a B allele. Most people inheriting the B and most people inheriting the A, with the BB phenotype being the less common one. So in this case, there were these 3 beads, 29, 30, and 32, that were stronger or reacting stronger. So again, reported as MFIs compared to sort of all the other beads. And when you look at what's the common antigen across these 3 beads, you see it's the 2B. And you can see the heterozygous bead is also actually reacting weaker with decreased expression of the B antigen. So this fits with an anti-2B antibody that this patient has also formed in addition to all the HLA antibodies. And we know that uh, in patients who or in terms of HPA antibodies, there's a lot of literature and evidence that talks about the HPA1A being, or the anti-HPA1A antibody being pathogenic. We know that it causes PTP. We know that it causes FNAIT. So there's a good amount of literature in that area, but a lot of the other ones don't have as much robust data. HPA2, for example, there isn't a lot published, and so when we get cases like this, generally we have to go back and look and see, is this clinically significant? Do we need to worry? Do we have to match around this antibody? And so, when this case happened, we went through, there was a case or a series published out of Versity in Wisconsin, which is a reference lab in the US that, did investigations for PTP, and they reported over that time period of the 83 cases that had positive antibodies, what were the specificities? And the majority were against HPA1A or 1B. There were 2 cases that had antibodies against HPA2B and one that had a 1B and a 2B. So maybe HPA2B causes PTP. Again, these were sent in to the reference lab for testing, so there was no associated clinical data or outcomes. But with a clinical suspicion, then there happened to be an antibody, there's perhaps a correlation there. There's also a case report that talked about anti-HPA2B causing um, refractoriness post-marrow transplant. So there's a question of maybe there's some clinical significance there. And then here was a case of FNAIT due to anti-HPA2B. With additional twist, they initially misinterpreted and thought it was an anti-1A, but ended up being the anti-2B was causing FNAIT. So maybe this antibody is clinically significant, and ideally, if we can avoid it by providing 2A2A donors, that would be better for the patient. And so kind of just to summarize, the patient, this was sort of her antibody panel. Her HLA genotype, she was A1, A25, B8, B18, which are the antigens here highlighted in blue. And then she's 2A2A with an anti-2B antibody for the HPA. So how do we find, platelets for this patient? For the program, we use a general cutoff of 20% for CPRA to be eligible. So if 1 in 5 are probably incompatible, that's the threshold we use to say that you can go through this program. And as you can imagine, as we describe it, there's a lot of work that goes into finding these platelets. So that cutoff helps to sort of distinguish between those patients who don't form antibodies or who probably do, and confirms that there is an immune component that we're working against. Whereas because if the CPRA is 0, really the products we're providing shouldn't be any different than randoms. And the way we try to find donors is we can do HLA identical to the patient. And if that's not possible, we can find donors who have antigens against which the patient does not have antibodies. So that's sort of a secondary option, which again should avoid this immune phenomenon with the caveat that, of course, exposure now exposes the patient to new antigens, and so they could form additional antibodies. So the second option may be a shorter term solution, but can often our patients only need short-term solutions to get them through that period of thrombocytopenia. This is just a snippet from a publication that looked at these different matching styles and if they provided a comparable corrected count increments. And so just pointing towards the figure on the right here, matched units, give it corrected count increment between 10,000 and 20,000 platelet count. And then if they did an antigen negative unit, so again, avoiding antigens to which the patient had DSAs, donor-specific antibodies, they got a similar sort of average CCI. When they, if they crossed weak antibodies, so ones with an MFI of less than 6,000, they also were able to get, a similar corrected count increment. And then when they tried to cross high donor-specific antibodies, so stronger antibodies, then they saw there was no increment. So kind of highlighting that maybe there is a triaging system that can help, especially in the very challenging cases. So in this case that we talked about, we looked at, at the time there was just over 8,000 donors in our database of who've been typed. And with the patients typing, that led to 81 who were matched to her typing. So about 1% of donors were the same typing as her. Unfortunately, when we add on that component of HPA, we have a smaller pool to work with. So all of these donors, because we've always known that HPA1 is clinically significant or pathogenic, they've all been typed for HPA1, but only more recently have we started to do a full genotyping for all the HPA systems. And so that is obviously more costly and a work in progress. And as of now, about 10% of these donors have had that full typing. So those are ones we actually know the HPA2 data on. And so if we're trying to match for both, from those 800 with our HLA typing, we're left with 6 people who match for both. And so the next step is, if we if we do antigen negative, so we include the donors to which she does not have antibodies, that added an extra 2 donors. So we went from 6 to 8 donors. So not great, but still helping to increase at least by 30%. And this is sort of just a snapshot of the donors that we had at the time, the 8 people. They're from various parts of the country, from Toronto, St. John's, Winnipeg, Vancouver. They've donated different types of blood. Most recently, whole blood E is for apheresis platelets, and then the timings are also different. This one being in 2020, this one being 2024. And we know that the ones who've not donated more recently are less likely to come back because they may have moved or they've switched to different type of program, or they're just not interested in donating. So, less likely to yield donor number 5, but it's something we would still try. And then the final strategy is to try to cross the weak MFI antibodies if we absolutely need to. And in this case, we added one extra donor who is B52 would be included in this list. When we get to this point, usually that's when we contact the clinical team and say that, there's not very many donors on the list or not enough to fill the needs of the patient. So we're going to extend to this matching. And this is really where we highlight the communication, and Natasha's going to talk more to this, where we want to know how did this, if we do recruit this donor, how did this unit do? Is this antibody actually clinically significant, or can we avoid or overcome it and get an increment and make it less relevant? And same goes for all the other donors. If some, we sometimes see despite the antigen matching, some donors do better than others for increments. And if we know that, we can re-recruit the good donors and knock the poor donors off of off that list for that particular patient.
Okay, so over to me. Akash, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. Okay. So now you've gone through, you've had your patient tested, you've looked at your results, you've tried to take away all the non immune issues which might be causing the refractoriness, and you've decided you're going to try to treat your patient with HLA, HPA selected platelets from Canadian blood. So the best place to go to get the request form in order to order these products is to blood.ca under the hospital services tab along the top. And then in the main menu in the hospital services page, you can hit the HLA HPA selected platelet program, which will bring you to the page you're seeing here. And that gives you a little bit of information and also gives you the big red button there that will get you to an electronically fillable version of the most current form that we are using. We don't recommend that you print these and put them in a folder somewhere, because we do update them and as needed. So if you want the most current one, you go here and you can print it if you want to fill it out by hand, or you can save it to your computer desktop or wherever you want, and then fill it out digitally. So next slide, please. Okay, so this is basically what the form looks like. It's a one-page form. And the most important thing I can say to you is, if you are not going to fill it out electronically and you're going to use your own hand, please print. Please make it as legible as possible. This form is used throughout the process, from being at the bedside with the donor. This is where the clinical staff at the donor blood center fills out the cytophoresis tag, or the blue tag that goes on the bag. They take their information from this form, because we have to have our tag exactly match the spelling of the patient's name as the hospital has indicated that we spell it. So if you guys spell the name wrong, we're going to write it wrong, because we have to follow you. So that form is gospel all the way through. It's looked at again in distribution, and my team who is organizing all of this for you is also focused on this form. So the clarity here cannot be more important. The other very important thing is that the patient identifiers, such as the names, date of birth, the public health number, and your hospital specific identifier, we call it an MRN on this form. It's different depending on what province we're in. Those identifiers have to match the identifiers that are on the test results that you are sending us from your local laboratory. So please be cautious when looking at that to make sure that they match. That's important. Or one of my team's going to call and just verify, is the patient's middle name really Jane? Because Jane isn't on the test results, but Martha Jane Smith is on the request form. So that's an important piece to remember, is that your test results need to match this form in order for us to ensure that, all our ducks are in a row. Next slide, please. So you send this form after you've completed it with the most up-to-date test results. We do require the test results to be no more than 3 months old. As Dr. Gupta mentioned, HLA antibodies tend to wax and wane for some patients, not for every patient, but they do change over time. And as your patient is transfused, that may add antibodies. So we really, we ask for test results that are less than 3 months old. We need the HLA typing and the HLA antibody report. So we need them both. So send those along with the request form to your local distribution site where your blood bank orders all their product from, and their main phone number for getting a hold of Canadian Blood in Saskatchewan. The form then and the test results come in through my team. My team sets up the case file. It's given to one of my case managers. We then tell the various booking clerks who book our platelet donors that I need a donor for this case. We talk to Akash's, Dr. Gupta's lab, and we send them the test results and the request form. We get the patient donor selection list, and that is what our booking clerks use to book the correct donor for the correct patient. Sometimes when we first get the request in for a brand new case, the first thing my team does after we get this list from Dr. Gupta's group is we look in inventory to try and find a unit, get it to you as soon as possible if your request is, I need this right away. So that's the first thing we do. About 10 to 14% of the time, depending on how alloimmunized your patient is, we do find something in inventory. But if we don't find it in inventory, it can take somewhere between 3 and 6 days is our average, because, you know, we need to call the donor. The donor needs to come in and donate, and then the product needs to be processed and the testing needs to be completed, and then we need to ship it to your hospital. So that's why I always say there's no such thing as a stat HLA HPA selected platelet. It doesn't, unfortunately, doesn't work that way. Next slide, please. So one of the things that we do is that if you have a particularly complex patient who is going for a stem cell transplant or a surgery, as in the case that Dr. Gupta is using, reach out to us. You can do that either through any connections you might have with the physicians who work at Canadian Blood, or you can call your blood bank, can call your distribution site and say, I want to talk to somebody from HLA HPA, and they will send an email to me and we will call you. So we often, in these types of situations, we bring the clinical team for the patient together with our team, and we review, you know, what's going on, what do we need, and we can set the logistics of getting this product to you around your needs and your patient's needs as far as what's going forward. And for a really complicated patient, this is really valuable to do, so that we all get ourselves in the same, you know, rowing the boat in the same direction. So it's very important. One of the other things, as Dr. Gupta mentioned, that that my team also does is we ask that you send us a pre and post transfusion, HLA HPA selected platelet transfusion information or data. We do have a form that you are welcome to use. You would access it from the website, same as how you got the request form for the product. It as well can be digitally filled out, electronically filled out, or you can print it and use it by hand. Or if you wish to use your own form to let us know what the pre and post counts are with the unit number that you're giving us the data for, that comes into to me or one of my colleagues, and we look at those. And what we're doing is just making sure that the patient's getting the kind of increment that we're expecting. And over time, if the patient steadily gets a poor increment from one particular donor, but good increments from all the other donors, then we're going to kick that donor off the patient's list. So basically, we're curating our donor list to best suit your patient. So it's really important that when you have a patient who's being treated with this very special product, that if you possibly can, and I know the labs are short-staffed, but if you can send us pre and post information with the unit number and the date that it was transfused, that would really help us just to make sure that we're doing the best we can for your patient. Next page, please. So at the bottom of the form is what's called the update for existing requests. So your patients change sometimes on a dime. They get better, they get worse. They become a day patient and might need their product at different times of the week as opposed to when they were an inpatient. So you can use this section of the form to let us know when something has changed, especially well, it's important in either direction. If you need more product and you need it soon, the sooner you tell us, the sooner we can get that product to you. Or if your patient is recovering and you need less product, if you tell us that, then that frees up that very valuable donor who might be a match for some other patient in the country. We do have a limited donor base, so as soon as you can tell us that you don't need our product anymore or you need less product, the better it is for every alloimmunized patient across the country. So you can just, if you keep a copy of the form that you filled out to request the product from us, you just fill out the section at the bottom with the change that you're indicating, send it to your local Canadian Blood Service distribution site. They get it to me, and my team will update your order in this way. Next slide, please. So this is just a little bit of data, which is of interest for you guys. What we do is we try to recruit donors who are as close to the patient as possible. This is done for lots of reasons, but the main ones being it gives the clinician more shelf life for the product. If we collect the product in Toronto for a Toronto patient, we can usually get it on the shelf within 48 hours, maybe a little more, to a local hospital. And so that gives you, lots of days. It could only last 7 days. So the longer you have options where it can be in your facility and you can transfuse your patient when it's needed, it gives the clinician just more flexibility when they're going to treat their patient. So we do make every effort to recruit our product as close to the patient as possible. It's not always possible. In fact, it's a lot of the time not always possible. And so we do ship product across the country, back and forth. And this, of course, shortens the time that it has left, because if it's going from Newfoundland to BC, that's almost a full 24 hours of logistics to move that product, depending on flight availability. So if we have to move the product, it's going to shorten the life a little bit and make it more difficult for you folks to have that flexibility that you need to treat your patient. Next slide, please. So this is a little bit of data from a presentation that Dr. Gupta and I, a poster we had at CSTM this year, just showing you the growth of the HLA HPA selected platelet program over these last 4 years. As you can see, we've had quite a spike between the number of cases in 2023 compared to the number of cases in 2024. So it's getting busy. The product is being used by more clinicians across the country. Next slide, please. This is just another interesting piece of data that we thought you might like to see. As you can see here, the red bar is the number of HLA HPA units requested by our customer, the hospitals. And the teal bar is the HLA HPA units that were shipped. And in the box is our annual calculation of our fill rate. So, 99, 99, 98, and then with that sudden jump in our caseload and also the complexity of our cases, we unfortunately went to a 95% fill rate. And we are working to improve our donor pool in an effort to keep up with the demand across the country. Next slide. So that's you, Akash.
Yes, so just going back to the case, so as Natasha mentioned, prior to this patient going for surgery, we did meet with a clinical team. We came up with a bit of a plan. We recruited or we found times where multiple donors would be available so we could have those donations to support her in the pre-op and post-op period. And so you can see here in the red diamonds is where she got actually really good increments from these HLA matched platelets that we got. She had her surgery, which went well. And then unfortunately, she had some post-procedural bleeding. She developed a hematoma, had to go back to the OR, which was unexpected. And we didn't have a plan in place for that period post-op because it was not expected. So you can see, post-operative, she developed bleeding, and then she had to get a bunch of random platelets, which did not do much of an increment. And even she had, like, this was the one post-op unit that we had kind of scheduled for. It also didn't do much with the bleeding and the other things that were going on with her. So the non-immune factors, I think, played a larger role in this case at that particular time. And then with they let us know that this was happening, and we went back and tried to re-recruit some of those donors. It took a couple of days or maybe a week to get a donor, and then we got, 2 units from one donor that helped to bump her up and then sort of support her as she recovered. And then, last I heard, she's doing well. And she's still, chronically transfused and should be getting these, an HLA unit every so often just to keep her counts up as needed. So just to kind of highlight the benefit of that communication, and like we're obviously at CBS don't have direct insight into how the patient's doing, but that information can very much help us in trying to provide sort of the best service or that boutique product for your patient. So really, in summary, just a reminder that HLA alloimmunization is the most frequent cause of immune-mediated platelet refractoriness. Um, our program can provide HLA compatible platelets to assist with this, or HLA selected, and to help monitor the effectiveness, because depending on the complexity of the patient and what's going on, we do request or recommend that post-transfusion platelet counts be done every time a patient gets an HLA selected platelet, just to see how well they respond. And if that gets fed back to us, we can use that to select future donors for that patient. And as your patient, needs change, then please communicate that with us. As Natasha said, if the needs go up or the needs go down, it's good to let us know, because we do need lead time to book more people to meet those demands. We can't, if you wanted platelets this week, today, probably could not do it. Like somebody donated today, if it takes 2 to 3 days, we get something maybe by Friday if we're lucky. So you kind of need, that much advance notice, and our team works Monday to Friday. So we don't, we're not calling donors on the weekend. So it does take a little bit of logistic challenge, and of course across the country, different time zones all play a role into that as well. These are more for your review afterwards. There's some resources here on the CBS website just for additional reading. There's a link for the CPRA calculator. And then again, this email, or you could email Natasha or myself directly if there's any questions or queries about cases or journal input. We're always happy to answer those questions or engage in further discussion. And with that, happy to take or answer any questions that the group might have. I will stop sharing so I can see the
There are two questions in the chat. I just wanted to ask Dr. Mustafa, the first item that you put in there is that just not discerning a question? Were you just giving us information, which is perfectly fine? I just want to know, is there a question there that we need to answer?
Sorry if I can unmute myself to clarify my
Yes, oh,
first
that's amazing. You
comment.
can unmute. That's great.
Yeah, suddenly it came up. So, so thanks, Kash, for this informative session. It's I really enjoyed it. So my comment is, some of these cases, like, what is the percentage that you can find HPA without HLA? Because my understanding that HLA is very immunogenic. So if someone their immune system is very active, they will form first HLA antibodies, and then they will form HP at a later stage. There might be cases, I'm not saying there is not, but there might be cases that is only selective HPA without HLA. So the reason I'm asking, because a lot of the cases that we receive in the lab become HLA negative. So do we still need it to send it to HPA as a reflex? And my other question is, do you like this test to be done automatically by CBS without the lab being filtering it first, that you will get more requests than what you need?
So,
Yeah.
great question. So I'll answer the first one. You are absolutely correct. So HLA alloimmunization, much more common, quite rare to see just HPA. You see those, I think, in like the few cases of PTP we've had, some have not had HLA, just the HPA antibody, or like pregnancy with FNAIT, sometimes those moms just have the HPA, don't form any HLA antibodies. So yes, if the HLA is negative, then I'm much less like I have very low suspicion that it's HPA mediated alloimmune thrombocytopenia. However, I guess, question is for those cases, I would go back to the clinical team and wonder, are you concerned about PTP, or have you, are there other, can it be explained by something else? If if there's nothing non-immune that is contributing, and it really seems like there's immune, then I would say send it. We can investigate. For us, we do both on all of them just because as the reference lab, it's hard to get more samples or get repeats. So since we have the DNA and the serum, we'll just do both. That's just been our workflow. But yeah, looking at the cases where we test, you're absolutely correct. Most of them have HLA or nothing at all. Very rarely do they have negative HLA and positive HPA in the context of platelet refractoriness.
Yeah,
The
you'll
second
sometimes.
question, oh, sorry,
Oh,
go ahead,
sorry.
Natasha.
You'll
Yeah.
sometimes see if a patient is being treated with HLA HPA selected platelets, that they have HLA antibodies, and they're not responding. The clinicians have taken care of all the other reasons why they might be refractory. That's usually when we'll see a physician look, if they really just can't figure it out, then they'll say, well, let's test for HPA just in case, and so we'll see it at that point often.
Yeah, and the second question, I don't know the correct answer there. So, I mean, our testing service is available. We get from, various hospitals across the country. Most centers do send to their local HLA lab. Generally, that's faster turnaround time and easier shipping than sending to us. But no, like we don't reject if we get from anywhere. We'll do the testing. So I guess I would put that to you in terms of how does that affect your workflow, and would you prefer, or your clinicians prefer it one way or the other? Um, if everything was going to come to us, then please give me a heads up so we can anticipate that in terms of change of workload. But I would say most of the provinces do similar to what Saskatchewan does, is the bulk of the testing goes to the local HLA lab as sort of a filter, and then they send to us as needed. Um, but it
The
does vary.
flow that,
So yeah,
oh,
go
sorry,
ahead.
Cash.
No, please go ahead.
The flow that we typically see is that the local laboratory does the HLA testing and typing. That goes to the clinicians who look at it, and then the request and the test results after the clinician looks at it and goes, oh, they look at all these HLA antibodies. No wonder. So that's when they decide that trying HLA HPA selected platelets is a good course of action for their patient, and they send it to us that way. So if your question is, do you want the lab to send it straight to us? That's not as useful, because then it might not come in at the same time as the request form for product, or the clinician may change their mind. So yeah, I may be interpreting your question not correctly, but generally the flow is it's tested, the results go to the clinician looks at the results, looks at the patient, makes a decision, and then sends it all in for us to fill the order.
Yeah,
No,
and
perfect. I think you answered it correctly. Perfect. Thank you.
yeah, and for the fusion reports for the complicated patients, usually that's when I'll reach out to the clinical team or yourself in the case of this province, and ask for those results, because we are trying to, either look at eplets or epitopes or some kind of more advanced matching. But as I showed, Saskatchewan's not a very big user of the program. I think when we pulled it out of in 2024, there were 5 patient requests. And as Natasha showed, we have like 50 patients across the country on average per week that we're supporting. So for the province, and I don't know if it's like we see this in different centers. Some use it a lot and some don't. And is it, yeah, I don't know exactly why that is, if it's just a culture, or if it's, the testing is being done or not being done and not identified, or just the patients aren't becoming refractory for whatever reason. Um, but so we haven't had any of those really complicated patients from Saskatchewan, but if they do come up, then I would reach out and see if we can get that data so we can try to do some more advanced matching.
The other important thing to have in the back of your mind is that we calculate our when I'm looking at approving a patient for the program, I'm doing the calculation, the CPRA, based on the A and B only, because we don't test our donors for the other the CWs, and there's a whole, depending on what your lab decides to include, like if it's for an organ transplant, then the list of antibodies includes antibodies that we don't test our donors for. And typing, I'd let Akash fill in the blanks here because I'm making a mess out of this statement. But the patient can have a higher CPRA if you use all the options, and we only look at A and B because that's all we do for our donors.
Yep. Yeah. Perfect, Natasha. Just, yeah, we don't look at class 2.
That's the word I was scrambling for. Class 2. Thank you.
Are there any other questions from the attendees?
If any of you should think of a question after the presentation, please feel free to email me at natasha.rickards@blood.ca or Dr. Gupta. We'd be happy to try and answer it for you, or we'll find someone who can answer it for you if we're not the right people. So we're always happy to help. HLA, HPA selected platelets only runs on what I call banker's hours. So, we won't, if you send it in on a Saturday at midnight, I'm not going to touch it until Monday morning. So just be aware of that time lag. We don't run 24/7.
Okay, if there's no other questions, we're happy to give everybody 10 minutes back at the end of the day.
Great. Thank you very much again for inviting us. And
Yes, and
hopefully we'll
thanks for all
talk
the
soon.
questions. Yeah.